All right, let's dive into this one. This is a deep dive that I think a lot of people have been asking for into Ajanta Pharma.
Yeah.
So we've got the whole shebang here. We've got annual reports and financials, and there's a sustainability report. So, yeah, we're really going to be able to go from like Ajanta who to, okay, I see what's going on here.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And you know what really jumped out at me right away looking at all this is their sustainability goal.
Yeah.
I mean, over 50% of operations powered by green energy in just the next 2 years.
That's pretty aggressive. So they're not messing around. Clearly, they're thinking long term.
So let's start with the basics. Ajanta Pharma, founded in 1979, headquartered in Mumbai, publicly traded company. You can find them on the Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange.
Dual listed.
Mm.
Which, you know, in that market, that says something right there about their kind of ambition and their reach.
Exactly. So the bulk of their business, 71%, is branded generics.
Right.
And that's mostly in India, Asia, and Africa, but they're not just focused on those regions.
They also operate in the U.S. generics market, which makes up about 23% of their sales.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're playing in both of those worlds, right? You've got the high growth potential of the emerging markets, but then also the stability of that U.S. market.
Yeah, for sure. And their mission statement actually really speaks to that. It's foundation, craft in the future. Like, they're grounded but forward-looking.
Yeah, I like that. And, you know, they've actually won the Great Place to Work award 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Which, you know, in an industry like pharmaceuticals, that can be pretty cutthroat. Says something about how they value their people.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the global pharmaceutical market.
Sure.
I mean, this thing is huge, right?
It's massive, and it's projected to reach like $2.3 trillion by 2028.
Wow.
And a lot of that growth is being driven by emerging markets, places like China and India.
Okay, that makes sense why Ajanta is so focused on those areas.
Yeah.
But what about more developed markets like North America and Europe?
Yeah, so growth is slower there because, you know, those markets already have really high per capita medicine use.
So there's less room to grow, basically.
Exactly.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Mm.
So how's Ajanta actually performing within this, you know, global landscape? Let's break it down. Let's start with revenue. They're doing really well in India, right?
Oh, yeah. Domestically in India, their sales grew by 9.4% last year.
Wow.
Which is above the industry average.
That's impressive.
Mm.
What are some of the key drivers behind that growth in India? Are there any particular product areas or anything like that?
So they've been strategically launching new products.
Okay.
And also seeing really strong performance in some key therapeutic segments like cardiac, ophthalmology, derma, and pain.
Smart. So they're really understanding the needs of the Indian market and tailoring their offerings accordingly.
Exactly.
Okay, now their export sales. I remember reading that those have slowed down a little bit.
They did experience a bit of a slowdown, mostly due to like inventory rationalization by distributors, particularly in Africa.
Gotcha. So not necessarily a demand problem, more of a, you know, supply chain issue. Or
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens post-rationalization, right?
Yeah, for sure. So they're doing well in India. They've got a little bit of a temporary slowdown in Africa. They're in the U.S., okay? So revenue streams seem pretty diverse.
Yeah.
Let's talk about profitability, though. I mean, are they actually making money?
Oh, they are definitely making money. Their PIT margin for fiscal year 2024 was 19%.
Wow.
Which is pretty impressive. And that's actually up significantly from 16% the year before.
Okay, so their profitability is strong and improving. What's contributing to those, you know, pretty good margins?
Well, a combination of things. Smart cost management strategies.
Okay.
And I think what's really interesting is their investment in R&D. It's all kind of tied together.
Wait, I touched on it earlier, but I want to hear more about their R&D because, I mean, as we know, it's the heart and soul of any pharma company.
Yeah, and they're not just, you know, pumping up generics. They've got over 800 scientists dedicated to developing, you know, complex, difficult-to-make products.
That's a lot of brain power.
It is. It's a real statement.
Yeah, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. How much are they actually spending on R&D?
In the last fiscal year, they spent about 208 crore, which is roughly 5% of their revenue.
Wow, that's not insignificant.
No, it's a serious investment, and you can already see the results. I mean, they've filed patent applications for novel compositions for hypertension treatment.
Okay, so new approaches to treating high blood pressure.
Exactly.
That's pretty great.
And they're also venturing into the neuropathic pain treatment market, which, you know, has huge potential.
I was going to ask about that. I remember reading about that. What is neuropathic pain exactly?
It's basically chronic pain that's caused by nerve damage. And current treatment options, they're not always that effective and they can have a lot of side effects. So if Ajanta can crack this nut, it could be huge.
Yeah, for sure. So they're not just keeping up with the curve, they're pushing it, which I think is really, really interesting.
Yes, impressive.
Now, you mentioned earlier that they're active in both regulated and emerging markets, which seems like a pretty tricky balancing act.
It is, because each market has its own set of challenges and opportunities, right? So you've got regulated markets like the US that offer stability and potentially higher margins, but they're also really competitive and they have a ton of regulatory hurdles. Then you have emerging markets like India and parts of Africa that offer massive growth potential, but also, potentially more volatility and lower margins.
Yeah, for sure. So how is Ajanta doing in navigating these very different market dynamics?
It's an ongoing process, right? But so far, they seem to be doing a pretty good job.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Now, we know that profitability is great, but it's only one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
What about their overall financial health? Things like debt levels, cash flow, working capital. How responsibly are they managing their money?
Well, from their financials, they seem to be doing pretty well. Their current ratio is 3.05, which is a good sign. They've got strong liquidity.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
Basically, they have enough assets on hand to cover their short-term liabilities. So no immediate cash flow issues.
That's reassuring, right?
Yeah, for sure. And their receivables days have increased a little bit.
What are receivables days again?
It's just how long it takes them to collect money from their customer.
Right, right.
So a slight increase could just mean that their business is growing, right? But it's worth keeping an eye on.
Okay, so something to monitor, but not necessarily a red flag at this point.
Right. And on the flip side, their inventory management has actually improved. Their inventory days have gone down.
So they're turning over their stock more quickly, which means less cash tied up in inventory. That's a good sign. Okay, so we've got this picture of a company with really ambitious sustainability goals, a strong focus on R&D, and smart diversification across markets.
Right.
But every business has risks, right? So what are some of the key risks that Ajanta needs to watch out for?
Well, there's a couple of things, right? Their dependence on government procurement agencies in Africa is a big one.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So a lot of pharmaceutical distribution in Africa goes through these government agencies. And their priorities and policies can change, which can lead to some unpredictable swings in demand.
So Ajanta's success in Africa is somewhat tied to the decisions of these agencies.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And what about other risks? I mean, obviously, the U.S. generics market is extremely competitive.
Oh, yeah, incredibly competitive. There's constant pressure to keep prices low, and there are always regulatory challenges.
So Ajanta has to stay really agile and innovative to even survive in that market, let alone thrive.
Exact.
And then, of course, there are always those big, unpredictable global events, right?
Oh, absolutely. Economic downturns, political instability, things like that.
Stuff that nobody can really control.
Right. But those things can have a huge impact on a company's operations and its bottom line.
So it's all about risk management, right?
Exactly. Being prepared for the unexpected and being able to adapt quickly to whatever gets thrown your way.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, but I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we've only just begun.
Ajanta is clearly a company with a lot going on, They're trying to balance this need for steady revenue with, this desire to innovate and push the boundaries in the pharmaceutical world.
Exactly. It's a fascinating blend of the practical and the aspirational.
Yeah, absolutely. So stay tuned as we dive deeper into Ajanta's performance in specific markets and also really get into the nitty-gritty of their R&D pipeline.
Yeah, we're going to unpack all of that and more.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
All right, so we've kind of laid the groundwork, for Ajanta Pharma, where they came from, what they focus on, and how they've been performing. But to really get a sense of their potential, we need to kind of dig into what's driving their success.
Yeah, for sure.
And you can't talk about pharma without talking about R&D, right?
Right.
It's the engine of the industry.
Absolutely. We talked about Ajanta's R&D efforts a little bit in the last segment, and I got to say, I was pretty impressed. Over 800 scientists dedicated to innovation.
Yeah.
That's a big commitment. What are some of the things they're focusing on specifically?
Well, it's a mix of, expanding their generics portfolio, but also venturing into, new specialty products.
Sure.
They're not just replicating existing drugs. They're developing, complex formulations, tackling those, difficult-to-manufacture medications, which, in the generics market, that can be a real differentiator.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned earlier that they're filing patents for new hypertension treatments.
Right.
That sounds promising. What makes their approach unique?
Well, I mean, hypertension or high blood pressure, right? It's a huge global health issue.
Yeah, for sure.
And Ajanta is developing like novel compositions, new combinations of drugs, or maybe new formulations
Okay.
that could offer like improved efficacy or maybe fewer side effects.
So potentially better treatment options for patients,
Exactly.
which would be a big deal, especially in a market that's, already pretty crowded.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the neuropathic pain treatment that we talked about earlier,
Yes.
that's a totally different ballgame.
Right. It
Yeah.
seems like a much riskier bet.
It is riskier,
Yeah.
but also potentially a much bigger reward.
Right, because neuropathic pain is notoriously difficult to treat.
It is.
Yeah.
And current options often come with, some pretty nasty side effects.
Right, so if they can crack this, it could be huge.
Oh, yeah. It could be a game changer.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about Ajanta's global reach, right?
Sure.
Because they're playing in both regulated markets like the U.S. and emerging markets like India and Africa.
Right.
That seems like a really, really tricky balancing act.
It is, because each market kind of comes with its own set of challenges and opportunities.
Totally.
Yeah. So how are they doing in these very different arenas?
So far, so good, I think.
Okay, good.
Their success in India is undeniable, right?
Yeah, their domestic sales growth is really impressive.
Yeah, they're outperforming the industry average.
And they're navigating, the complexities of that market really well.
Absolutely. It's their home turf,
Right.
Right.
What about export markets, though?
Yeah, so we talked about the slowdown in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting because the African market's really unique.
In what way?
It's heavily reliant on government procurement agencies,
Okay.
which, those agencies can be a little bit unpredictable.
Right, so that adds a layer of complexity for Ajanta.
It does, for sure.
What about the U.S.?
Yeah, so the U.S. generics market, right?
It's a beast.
It is a beast. It's incredibly competitive. There's constant price pressure.
Huh.
And Ajanta is up against, some really big players.
Right, so they have to be on their A game.
Absolutely.
Constantly innovating. Yeah. And keeping their manufacturing costs down, which is, not easy.
Not easy at all. All right, so let's get into Ajanta's financials, shall we?
Let's do it.
Because we know they're profitable.
Right.
But what about, the nitty-gritty details? Debt levels, cash flow, working capital. How are they managing their money?
Well, I gotta say, looking at their financial statements, they seem to be doing pretty well.
Okay, that's good to hear.
They have a healthy current ratio, which means they've got strong liquidity.
Okay, so remind me what that means again.
Basically, it means they have enough assets on hand to cover their short-term debts, right?
Right.
So no immediate cash crunches.
That's good. That's good. What about their debt levels overall? Are they taking on a lot of debt to, fuel their growth?
Their debt levels seem pretty manageable. I don't think they're over-leveraged.
And what about cash flow?
Cash flow is strong.
Okay, that's important.
Yeah, and I think part of that is due to their, efficient inventory management. Remember, we talked about their inventory days going down.
Right.
Right.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, it means they're not tying up a ton of cash in inventory,
Exactly.
which frees up resources for, other things.
Like R&D or expansion, right?
Exactly. Okay, so their financial house seems to be in order.
Yeah, for the most part.
But as we know, every business faces risks.
Oh, yeah.
So what are some of the key risks that Ajanta should be mindful of, moving forward?
Well, we already talked about a couple, right? Like their dependence on those government agencies in Africa
Mm-hmm.
and the cutthroat competition in the U.S. generics market.
Right, right. But are there other things that, they should be thinking about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the global pharmaceutical industry is heavily regulated, right?
Yeah.
And regulations can change, which can have a huge impact on, a company's operations and its profitability.
Yeah, absolutely. So they need to be able to adapt to those changes really quickly. Exactly. And then there's the rise of biosimilars.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
So these are basically like generic versions of those really complex biologic drugs,
Okay.
which are becoming more and more important.
Right. Right.
And Junta hasn't really gotten into that market yet. So that's something to watch, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, there are always the, unforeseen events
Oh, of course.
like economic downturns, political instability, natural disasters.
And all that stuff that you can't really plan for, but you have to be ready for.
Exactly. So risk management is super important.
It's crucial, especially in an industry like pharma.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. R&D, global reach, financials, risks. It's pretty complex, right?
It is, yeah.
But to really understand Ajanta, we need to zoom back in on those key therapeutic segments that we talked about earlier.
Right, those areas that are driving their growth, especially in India.
Exactly. So let's unpack those, understand why they're performing so well, and, what challenges they might face going forward.
It sounds good to me. Let's do it.
Okay, so we're back. And we've talked about Ajanta's financials, their R&D, their global reach. But now I want to zero in on those specific therapeutic segments that are really driving their growth, especially in the Indian market.
Right, those key areas.
Yeah.
It's a pretty interesting mix. They're strong in cardiac health, ophthalmology, derma, pain management.
Yeah. It is an interesting mix. And those are all big markets in India, right?
Oh, huge markets.
Let's start with cardiac health.
Yeah.
Why is that such a strong area for Ajanta in India? Is it just that they have the right products? Or is there more to it than that?
Well, it's more than just having the right products. I mean, India has a really high burden of cardiovascular diseases, unfortunately.
Right.
Lifestyle changes, rising stress levels, an aging population. It's all contributing to this, growing problem.
So the demand for cardiac medications is huge.
It's enormous. And Ajanta's in a good position to meet that demand, right? They've got a wide range of generic cardiac drugs.
Okay, so they're offering affordable alternatives.
Exactly. And they're not just offering the same old medications, right? They're also doing that R&D, developing new formulations, new combinations of drugs.
Right. So they're innovating as well.
Exactly. Which is smart because it allows them to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
What about ophthalmology? What's driving their success in that segment?
So India has a big problem with eye diseases, right? Especially cataracts and glaucoma, and access to affordable eye care. It's a major challenge, especially in rural areas.
Right.
So Ajanta's really stepped up and, built a strong presence in that market.
Okay, so filling a need.
Exactly.
Are they mainly focused on generics in the ophthalmology space as well?
Yeah, for the most part, generics, eye drops, medications.
Okay, making quality eye care more affordable.
Right, making it more accessible.
Yeah, that's great. What about dermatology? Is it kind of a similar story there?
It is, yeah. Skin conditions are super common in India. Everything from acne and eczema to psoriasis. And Ajanta's got a broad portfolio of dermatological products.
Okay, so they're covering the bases there.
Yeah, they are. And, they're really focused on quality and affordability.
Yeah, making those treatments accessible to as many people as possible.
Exactly.
Makes sense. All right, last but not least, pain management. What's Ajanta's strategy in that segment?
Well, pain management's a tough one.
Yeah, it is.
There are so many different types of pain, so many different treatment options, but Ajanta offers a pretty diverse portfolio of pain medications, targeting everything from acute pain to chronic conditions.
Okay, so a little bit of everything.
Yeah, pretty much. And of course, there's their work in neuropathic pain treatment.
Right, which we talked about earlier.
Which is a major focus for them.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area because there's such a big need for, new and effective treatments.
Absolutely. And if they can pull it off, it could be huge.
Right. So it's cool to see how they're kind of balancing this, need for steady revenue from generics with this ambition to innovate and develop these new, groundbreaking treatments.
Yeah, it's a smart strategy.
It really is. And I think it speaks to their long-term vision, right? They're not just thinking about today. They're thinking about, where the industry is going and how they can be a leader.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've done it. I think we've successfully unpacked Ajanta Pharma.
Yeah, I think so too.
We've gone through their history, their financials, their R&D, their global reach, and now we've really zoomed in on these key therapeutic segments that are driving their growth.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. It's been quite a journey.
It has.
And I think we've come away with a really good understanding of what this company is all about.
Yes, absolutely.
Their strengths, their challenges, their opportunities, and also, some of the risks that they face.
Right, because no company is perfect.
Exactly. But Ajanta seems well equipped to handle whatever comes their way.
Yeah, I think they're in a good spot.
So to everyone listening, I hope you found this deep dive as informative and, as interesting as we did.
Yeah, we had fun with this one.
We did.
Yeah.
And if you want to learn more, be sure to check out the show notes for links to all the source material.
Yeah, dive in, do your own research.
Exactly. And if there's another company or industry that you'd like us to do a deep dive on, just let us know.
Yeah, we're always up for a challenge.
That's right. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.